If not, I can also just advance the slides.
Okay, yeah, I will get started then, and I'll let you know when to advance slides for me. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. There are almost 8 billion people on this planet, all of whom come from differing backgrounds and cultures, and all of whom live varying lives. But despite all the differences that make each human being unique, the one thread that we all have in common is that we all need to eat food to survive every single day. And the base industries in Maslow's hierarchy of needs confirms this. When I look to the future, I see the looming shadow of a global food crisis where our agricultural systems infrastructure and capacity is stretched so thin that we won't be able to produce enough food to keep up with the exponential population growth. It is jarring to think that in the next few decades, we will need to address one of the most critical global challenges that we've ever seen, which is the future of food and agriculture. Growing up, I was taught not to waste food, as it is the ultimate necessity and is created out of labor and love. But it wasn't until I drove 3 hours with a group of young, hopeful entrepreneurs to visit a watermelon farm a few years ago that I truly understood the scope of food waste. As I was walking around this farm, I noticed hundreds of acres of ripe melons that were split and decomposing on the fields. It was a jarring image and very similar to the pictures you see on the screen right now. And it turns out this is actually a regular occurrence. The farmer couldn't justify hiring labor to pick all the melons since processing and shipping costs could be more than the unit cost for the fruit itself. And in some other cases, oversupply due to drop in demand from food service retailers, markets, and other avenues left farmers with no choice but to let their watermelon crop decompose and get churned back into the ground. And though this is a global systemic issue, I think the biggest problem here is the general lack of consumer awareness about such problems that exist right under our noses. Broader exposure to farm-level issues have made me more aware of the challenges our food system faces and the inefficiencies involved. Now, it's time to shed a spotlight on the innovators and entrepreneurs who are working to address these problems and increase our odds of building a more sustainable global food system that works for everyone. Next slide, please. But as it stands today, building a sustainable global food system isn't a priority for most people. According to the World Economic Forum's most recent Global Risks Report, business leaders, NGOs, and academics believe that extreme weather and climate action failure are the most likely and impactful risks over the next decade. And according to a recent Gallup poll, only 1% of respondents named hunger and food production as the most important problem. And while environmental challenges are critical to solve, I do want to point your attention towards the challenges facing the agricultural industry today. By 2050, the global population is projected to reach nearly 10 billion, which is a 26% increase from today, with a rapidly growing middle class that will require us to increase our food production and output by at least 60% over current levels. To put this into perspective, in the next 40 years, we'll have to produce as much food as we have ever produced in human history, but we'll have to produce this food using far fewer resources than we've ever had. And this will be no easy feat, as we currently already face significant challenges in the agriculture and food production industries today. The ones people might be most familiar with are food safety, of which over 580 million people are affected by foodborne illnesses every single year, or greenhouse gas emissions, of which 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide are emitted by the world's cattle population each year. To put that last number into perspective, if you gathered all of the cattle around the world and put them into your own country, they would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world behind China and the US. But what about the other issues that aren't talked about as often? About 1 in 9 people go to bed hungry every night. Yet, 1/3 of food produced globally for human consumption is lost or wasted. That amounts to over 1.3 billion tons of food waste produced every single year, which shows we still need to figure out how to better distribute and recycle our food resources. In addition, nearly 70% of global water withdrawal is from agriculture. Yet in the coming years, there will be 40% more demand for clean water than we currently are using, showing how inefficient we are at managing our own natural resources. And these inefficiencies are also being exacerbated by the 50% reduction in the availability of arable land across the globe in the last 50 years, largely caused by urbanization and climate change. The purpose of highlighting these challenges isn't to predict some impending doom of our natural resources or to criticize our ability to sustain life, but rather to show how much food production and agriculture actually matters and how these challenges affect more people's livelihoods than people expect. This is also a call to action for more entrepreneurs and investors to make our food systems and value chains more resistant, with the recent pandemic being a very, very good example of how our global food supply chains can be severely disrupted seemingly overnight, affecting exports for farmers, food prices for consumers, and ultimately generating more food waste than ever. Next slide, please. So what can we do to fill these gaps and help achieve the outcomes we're looking for? The food needed to meet the demand we seek must come from diversified technologies that enhance production efficiencies and promote sustainability across the entire food supply chain, from production all the way down to consumption. Right now, agriculture and food are ripe for digitization. According to McKinsey's Global Industry Digitization Index, agriculture is one of the least overall digitized industries in our entire society, scoring even lower than construction, hospitality, government, and education on the same index. This movement towards digitization, which means increasing digital spending on ag solutions, making ag processes more efficient, and improving human capital, needs to be supported by investment in technologies that can create scale sustainably. But that has been hard to come by. Many investors fear the risks that agriculture innovations bring. That includes limited liquidity, long sales cycles, high capital expenditures, and volatility due to direct commodity exposure. And it's been no secret that AgTech exit activity has remained remarkably low over the past decade compared to other sectors. But if you really think about it, people will always need to eat, and so farmers will always need to farm. I've personally spent much of my career being an evangelist for agri-food tech entrepreneurs. I've been involved in the agriculture and food investing space for the past 4 years, identifying, supporting, and investing in emerging technologies that will make this transformation possible and can create diverse systems that will build resilience in our own food systems. Now it's a matter of de-risking the businesses and technologies that will enable this agricultural revolution to flourish. I've realized through my work at both THRIVE AgTech Accelerator and Scrum Ventures that driving systemic change requires more than just passion and diligence. Entrepreneurs need an ecosystem and guidance that fosters deeper conversations and relationship building opportunities that will drive meaningful impact. This means making introductions to mentors and potential customers, educating founders on business strategy, supporting business development efforts, and providing access to capital that will allow companies to develop a commercially ready product faster. Next slide, please. So, what are some examples of technologies I have supported that I believe will help catalyze our sustainable food system development? Let's start with the issue of resource recycling, specifically manure recycling. You may be shocked to learn that I've tasted water that originated from cow manure and lived to tell the tale. The water was filtered and cleaned using a special manure treatment system, which takes manure that is traditionally stored in massive lagoons and recycles the dry solids into reusable fertilizer, and then filters out the rest into potable water that can be consumed safely or put back into the earth. This process has huge environmental impacts as it prevents the manure from contaminating surrounding land and crop production and significantly reduces the expense and environmental impact of waste liquids. During the accelerator, this company developed really close relationships with key agtech corporations and farmer cooperatives that led them to raising well over $1 million to cut down on device manufacturing costs and allow them to enter several new emerging markets where they can now provide clean water and recycled fertilizer to hundreds more farmers, all of whom can reduce their manure footprint by 75% or more. I say this is a win for sustainable farming and for climate change. The next technology I'd like to highlight is food safety testing. If you take a look at the CDC's 2018 and 2019 outbreak reviews, you'll see details about several major E. coli outbreaks that have affected everything from romaine lettuce to ground beef and even flour. all ingredients that we take for granted that are commonly used in almost everything we consume. Food safety recalls have been increasing each year over the past decade and directly impact consumer health and safety. This is why we invested in a company building portable and easy to use disposable biosensors that detect foodborne pathogens within minutes instead of days with legacy processes. The scope and speed with which this device works can potentially save millions of lives with early detection and could save food producers and retailers tens of millions of dollars in damages. Now, what about the value of pollination? If you consume blueberries, strawberries, almonds, or coffee, then you consume food products that require or are heavily aided by bee and fly pollination processes. Pollination is a key catalyst to food production that is often overlooked. And what most people don't know is that without the assistance of pollinators, most plants cannot produce fruits and seeds. This means a significant decrease in crop yields of several critical fruits and crops that we take for granted. And that's why we've invested in 2 companies tackling this problem from different angles. One, by using a biochemical approach to train flies to be effective pollinators, and one that uses imaging analysis to determine hive strength and colony size. These solutions have collectively raised millions of dollars, which has enabled them to land long-term partnerships with some of the largest fruit and almond producers in the world. This has allowed them to decrease beehive rental costs, meet increased demand for insect-pollinated crops, and help producers see up to 20% increase in crop yield and revenues across their operations. And these are just a few of the many examples showing how investing and supporting early-stage innovations in agriculture and food tech can drive long-term ROI and impacts on our global food production systems. To this day, I've worked closely with at least 15 such companies affecting the entire value chain by building incredible solutions like self-sustaining vertical farming modules, low-cost water filtration devices for rural communities, automated weeding robots that enable 40x labor reductions in fields, sustainable groundwater monitoring systems for water quality control, soil monitoring sensors, and farm-to-table produce delivery and fulfillment services. My hope is that by supporting problems like labor, food safety, supply chain inefficiencies, and environmental sustainability, that we can bring global attention and interest to the innovations happening in this industry. The more awareness we can bring to the deficiencies our food production systems currently have and expose people to the innovators and visionaries building viable solutions to solve these problems, the closer we will be to achieving true sustainable food security. The bottom line is this: our current agriculture and food production system is fractured, and we need to jumpstart innovation in this space in order to meet our food security goals. It's a daunting problem, but one that can be addressed by technology, fueled by digitization, and supported by investment and awareness. If you feel inspired to be a food fighter, I urge you to visit a farm, be more cognizant about the food you consume and the waste you produce, and encourage and support entrepreneurs trying to fight the good fight for our food system. It's time for humanity to come together now to help solve these problems. Let's feed the world. Next slide, please. If you'd like to discuss the future of food and agriculture in more detail, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email. And if you're interested in learning more about my general thoughts on all things VC, entrepreneurship, and food and agriculture, please feel free to follow my personal journey of wisdom on Medium. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Jonathan. So we have a question. What do you think of algae farms that grow algae using CO2 and wastewater from ethanol plants?
Interesting question. So I'm not as familiar with algae farms as an operation. I know algae is being used in several, the algae farms are currently being used as ingredients, as sustainable ingredients for a lot of food products that we are currently consuming. Algae farms, I think, algae has a lot of potential. So, you can use algae to fight a lot of food safety issues among plants. You can grow them in many different environments and conditions. And if you look at the alternative protein market, a lot of those products actually are using algae in order to kind of create the core protein processes to develop either plant-based proteins or even cell ag proteins. So I think, the algae farming community is one that needs more attention paid to it. If they use wastewater and carbon dioxide, I think that's a big plus in the farming community as well. Carbon sequestration is one kind of adjacent area to agriculture that's a lot of people are trying to pay a lot more attention to nowadays. Indigo Ag's Teraton Challenge started last year in order to focus on this issue. And so that's, generally my thoughts on algae in general, but happy to chat more offline about algae farms if that's a topic that's interesting to you.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. We also have another question about exploring ag tech companies and their markets. How is the market different for China versus US? What have you seen in different countries, and what kind of growth strategies make more sense in one versus the other?
Interesting question. So the needs for agriculture and food are different in both the U.S. And China. So, the U.S., kind of consumer focus is a lot on plant-based protein development, as well as, being able to kind of commercialize vertical farming operations. I've seen that trend become more and more popular over the past year and a half, as consumer preferences move more towards fresher food developed and grown closer to where they are. In China, it's very similar, but for different reasons. So plant-based and cell ag protein, are two very, very big themes in China, because China imports a lot of the food that they use, especially meat. And there have been several diseases that have, completely wiped out the pork production processes and supply chains in China. So, there is actually a lot of overlap between, what's popular here in the US, what's popular here abroad. And the market, itself, I think has matured a lot more in the US just because there are a lot more funds, investment funds and accelerator programs here in the US kind of focused on supporting this ecosystem. So, you've got a ton of venture funds that, only invest in farmer-facing agriculture. You've got a bunch of accelerator programs, or at least 5 or 6, that focus exclusively, or that are based here in the U.S. And you have a lot of kind of, like California is very well known for almonds and berries. You have the entire kind of Midwest section of the United States, from Texas all the way up north, that, is very, very strong in row crops, and even, I think there are a lot of blueberry farms on the East Coast as well. So there's a lot of kind of core agriculture pockets here in kind of the continental US that allows for the innovation to happen faster. There's more access to capital here as well. China slowly, moving in that direction as well. I know there are a couple of investment funds and accelerators that are in China now, trying to rebuild kind of a similar kind of ecosystem to what we have in the US. And Shenzhen, kind of the hardware capital of the world, is supporting a lot of the robotics and labor solutions that a lot of farmers in the US currently use. So a lot of different interesting kind of dynamics happening between the US and China here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Good to have your perspective on that. Interesting question. In some developing countries, they might not have the tools or budgets to kind of implement a lot of the maybe high-tech solutions. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you see practices like regenerative agriculture and polyculture feeding, working hand in hand with these kind of more maybe high-tech solutions?
Yeah, so emerging markets in developing countries, that's, one of the reasons why agriculture as an entire industry has not seen as much attention as many other industries. Is because a lot of the agriculture and kind of a lot of the farming community, is concentrated in a lot of these developing countries and emerging economies. And I think, there are a lot of opportunities, in Africa and India and Southeast Asia and many other places. for, development or support or incubation or even use of a lot of the technologies that we're seeing today. Even if they lag a couple of years behind kind of the US in adoption, the whole purpose of supporting agriculture innovation is to allow them to scale technologies and innovations at a pace where it becomes more cost effective for all farmers. And yes, there is a huge difference between kind of commercial large scale farmers versus kind of the smaller, maybe family oriented farms and many other economies. But a lot of the technologies that are produced in the US, I think kind of the biotech solutions have a lot of impact in third world countries. Microbes, fertilizers, these are, carbon sequestration. These are all, technologies and solutions and kind of subsectors of agriculture that have a lot of innovation and technology involved in them, but are also being distributed widely, being used widely because there is more of a need for solutions like these in other countries. And, going back to kind of resource sustainability, even like groundwater monitoring, like manure recycling, these are the kind of technologies that were built to be tailor-made for those developing countries that have, a lot of resources, a lot of natural resources, and a lot of space and a lot of land, but nothing to really capitalize on that with. So it's hard to say because I'm not from a developing country, exactly, what options farmers in Africa have, for example. But just from my conversations with farmers who do work in Africa and India and Southeast Asia, it sounds like adoption's a little bit slower, but it's on its way there.
Great, thanks. Yeah, you touched on the question I was going to ask. Someone asked, what are some barriers or bottlenecks to making significant change within the agriculture industry, and kind of why is it that it's the least digitized?
Yeah, barriers to entry. It's a really, really, interesting point to bring up. The key barriers to entry, the biggest one, I think, one, there's stigma and awareness. So, farmers have been facing all these critical challenges I brought up for generations and decades now. Yet, when you think about agriculture, you don't really see it as a sexy industry or one that, a lot of young people want to get into and want to support. And so in that respect, it's already at a disadvantage. All of the talent, all of the, the innovation, all of the research, a lot of it's going into, all of the quick growing industries like software, hardware, mobile technologies, and things that are a little bit more tangible to everyday kind of urban consumers. And less attention is paid to the rural consumers. So that creates a lot of fewer opportunities in the agriculture space as a whole. Another is long kind of production and commercialization cycles. So, an example of this would be strawberry harvesting. So, considering how long strawberry harvesting, like strawberry fields have been around for, you might be shocked to understand that there are actually very, very few technologies that can automate strawberry harvesting. Yet this industry, people have been trying to make technologies in this industry for at least 10 years now. 10 to 12 years ago, they were one of the first companies to come into the space. I think their name was AgGrad. They created a machine that could, had computer vision and kind of arms, robotic arms attached to it that could, analyze whether a strawberry was ripe enough. And if it was, it could cut or pull the strawberry off the vine, off the branches, and then store it. And that automation process was meant to replace the labor of 5 to 6, possibly even more, maybe even 10 people who are manually picking strawberries in fields. And this technology was around 10 to 12 years ago. Today, there are maybe 2 or 3 companies that have gotten to a stage where it's kind of very close to kind of widespread commercialization. Products have been built out, iterated on multiple times. They have started selling products, but this just happened recently in the past year or two. And there are still, only 8 or 9 companies that are actually operating in this space, doing both tabletop and field strawberries. So that kind of gives you kind of the perspective of how long it takes just for one idea in agriculture to manifest itself into commercial scale. And so, that's been a big challenge. And a lot of agriculture is also deep rooted in like biotech. So as I mentioned, gene editing crops, organisms, fertilizers, transgenic inputs, modification of any of the kind of ag inputs. These kinds of technologies require a lot of regulations, a lot of testing over many, many years before farmers can adopt this. And so, that's also been a huge limiting factor as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I'm curious, do you have any qualms eating GMO foods?
Well, I think, all the corn that we see today, is technically genetically modified over several generations. Many of the foods that we eat now have been modified in some shape or form over the past several generations as well. So, we unknowingly, all of us, eat genetically modified foods. And then you see the whole kind of, move to kind of plant-based proteins. And, if you have qualms about genetically modified foods, but you don't have any qualms about kind of what goes into plant-based protein products right now, it's a little bit of an oxymoron because plant-based protein products, they're made of like 25, 26 different ingredients, highly processed, very high sodium levels. And it's the move to plant-based is fantastic. And I think there's a lot of innovation happening in space that will make this a healthier option in the future. But if you're talking about, your health, and if you're talking about consuming products at scale that you perceive to be healthy, GMO versus plant-based protein products, there's a very kind of thin line between those industries right now. So me personally, considering how much how much I personally support the plant-based protein industry right now, I see genetically modified crops aren't really an issue. And genetically modified crops also, they gene edit out for pest control. So, it makes it more resistant to pests, more resistant to food diseases. So I think there's an argument on either side, but I personally don't have any qualms about it.
Yeah, that's interesting to have your perspective on that. I know we're a little bit over, but since we do have questions, I'll just ask one more question. It should be fairly quick. What's your thoughts on potential cross-border investing opportunities across China, US, Asia, US, and in what aspects are there more opportunities going to encourage this kind of cross investing?
Yeah. So, I mean, both the US and China, both economies that are, very highly supportive of the ag and food industries right now. There's actually a report today that just came out on PitchBook that I think they said that in Q2, the investment in ag tech was about $2.1 billion, which is a 170% increase over Q1 of this year. So you can see, there's kind of, as we go through COVID and the pandemic, more and more people are looking to our food production systems as kind of a viable place to put their money in. And I think China and the US, separately, are very keen on kind of supporting this movement as well. The only complication right now is, kind of the tepid kind of relationship between, US and China on the political front that have made kind of, trade has been a little tougher to do across borders. So at the current moment, I think, cross-border opportunities might be a little bit more stale and a little bit more stagnant, but I think they will kind of return to a normalcy. And there's a huge need in China to import a lot of protein products, of which the US and Europe are very, very strong at producing. And China has very, very strong hardware development capabilities. And so all of the robotics and kind of IoT sensor development and kind of mobile ag tech solutions that are so core and so important to the operations of US farming, can be developed quicker and more cost efficiently in China. So I think they'll get back to a place where there's going to be a lot of mutually beneficial opportunities for US and the China to work together. And in fact, actually on the alt protein side, and I know I'm talking about alternative proteins a lot, but Beyond Meat just signed a deal with China to launch 2 production facilities, I think right outside of Shanghai. And they are the very first non-Chinese plant-based protein company to be able to do that. So, you'll be seeing a lot more Beyond Meat plant-based products in China in the near future. And I know Impossible Foods is also trying to do something very similar. So you're seeing a lot of US technologies and a lot of US companies, showing interest in the humongous population in China. And so you'll see a lot of kind of cross-border investing opportunities as a result of this as well.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I know a lot of people are excited to have kind of more affordable Impossible burgers on their plates. So thank you for sharing kind of these opportunities and kind of your perspective on the ag tech space, which we don't really get to hear about that much. This is really interesting. And if people have any additional questions, feel free to type into the chat or message Jonathan directly if you're able to. And you can also type the Q&A and Jonathan can type his answer. And I guess if you have a cutting edge tech solution, make sure to reach out to Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.